working remotely. So know what it's like to stare down the pinhole camera and talk to your colleagues on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you're using. So at least you won't be having to get your head around how does this whole remote business work. But it is tricky, I think, to rebuild connections when you're working remotely. And actually, we put an article over on our main website on talentkeepers.co.uk. If you go and have a look, press the insights button. In fact, I can send these around afterwards, but go and click on Insights, and we've written a piece on 14 ways to raise your visibility when you are returning remotely. Okay, so rebuilding connections then. If you think about it, you're coming back and you want to start reconnecting with key people. I'd say there are probably three groups. There are people who are going to help you to settle in comfortably in the first couple of weeks. So that might be your line manager, that might be a buddy, it might be a friend at work. You also want to think about reconnecting with people who are going to help you to be successful in your current role. And the third group are reaching out to people who you think may be able to help you with future career aspirations. So that might be a mentor, or it might be senior people in your organisation. Remember that when you return from a period of leave, it is a fantastic hook or a fantastic excuse for reaching out to people who you might not ordinarily. And that can be good if you're thinking from a kind of strategic career development point of view, that you've got license to reach out to more senior individuals and simply say, I'm returning to work, I've been out for a year. As part of my reorientation, I'm just reaching out to different people to hear what's been going on while I've been away. And I'd really like to talk to you, X person, because I know that you know about Y, and I'd love to know about that. Could we have 20-25 minutes on the phone? And most people will say yes to you. Now, you want to be strategic about who you want to speak to and really think about the priority that you want to speak to people in. So do you need to talk to your line manager first? I would argue yes, that's one of the most important people to talk to. But if you've got a whole long list of people that you want to be reconnected with, then just think about who's going to be the people that are going to help you settle back in most quickly and then perform in your role. That second point that I've put on the slide, what do you want them to think, feel, know, and do? This is a little bit of prep before you go into any of those meetings, for you just to think about, what is it that I want this person to know about me or think about me? And what is it that I want them to do for me as a result of this conversation? You know, it's about going in with a bit of a plan. Okay, so that do might be that you want them to introduce you to somebody else, or it might be that you would like them to show you how a certain system operates, or tell you about how something has changed whilst you've been away. But go in with focus. And thirdly, you know, any good meeting, you've got to consider what's important to the other person, especially if you're asking for their time and you think that there's not really anything that you can give them. But just be respectful of what's important to them, so you can perhaps play to those things and maybe ask them questions about those things. We've already talked about planning. You know, who do you want to talk to first? That's something that we need to do, especially when time is precious and other people's time is precious. And my final point around rebuilding connections, I think, is possibly the most important on there. And that's about having this mindset that you are going to go in as a sponge and you're going to go into listening mode. So what do I mean by that? Well, one of the things that I hear from the coachees that I work with and that my team work with is, oh, but I don't want to reach out to people because what would I say? You know, I've been away for so long and I would just feel really embarrassed and awkward. Well, don't feel embarrassed and awkward, because all you need to say to the people that you're meeting with is, I've been away, you know, I'm going to, you know, sit back and listen to you. I'm in listening mode and I'm just absorbing like a sponge. And all of a sudden you're off the hook and you don't need to sit there feeling awkward. You know, this goes for one-to-ones as well as bigger meetings. You're in listening mode. So I hope that's helpful if that had been something that was on your mind about rebuilding connections. I'm going to move on now to talk about pitching for flexibility, and then we'll finish up with some things around balance, blending things between work and home. And then I want to go into questions with you. And I hope there are some questions, because it's always really interesting for people to hear what's on other people's minds. So pitching for flex then, let's give this some consideration. Oh my goodness, to be back on a bike, whizzing through the streets of London. If any of you have still been commuting to the office, it's been really lovely and quiet, hasn't it? But obviously the roads are filling up again now. So golden rules then for pitching for flexibility. And I must preface this by saying, I think it's probably got a whole lot easier for people who want to work flexibly, given that the pandemic has been one great big experiment on working flexibly. But the first thing is separating want from need. So it might be that you would like to only work 3 days a week, but really what you absolutely need is to work no more than, say, 4.5 days. So whilst you might have a nice to have list, work out what do you absolutely need in order to make working and family life work for you. Or it might be something about start and finish times. Perhaps ideally you'd love to be coming in at 10 o'clock when you are in the office, but realistically you need to be guaranteed that you can come into the office no earlier than, say, 9:15, because you just can't make the commute and childcare work. So wish list versus your absolute minimum requirements. Always vital when you're trying to persuade anyone of anything is just to see things from the other person's perspective. So just think about your ask from your line manager's perspective and what's likely to encourage him or her to say yes or no. And if you can play to some of the things that are perhaps on your line manager's mind, so much the better. And that really leads into this third point I'm making on the slide there about be a solution to a problem. You know, I always think about a coachee that I had many years ago, also called Jessica, who had a very big role for a global tech company, but headquartered West Coast America. And she basically said to her line manager at the time, you know, I think it would be really helpful if I was able to come online early in the morning and work late into the evening, so I can talk to Asia in the morning, and I can be talking to, you know, West Coast America to Seattle in the evening, you know, and obviously I'll take some time out during the middle of the day. I'm not going to work from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. What do you think to that? Line manager said, yeah, that's fantastic, great. And Jessica's motivation behind that was not only that she's a committed professional and wanted to do a great job for her organisation, but she'd just given birth to twins. And she knew, even though she'd obviously got childcare in place, that her twins were at their very best for a certain portion of the day. They're in the morning at their best. And Jessica wanted to be able to take some of that time to be with the twins separately and together. And so it worked for her to start early in the morning, work till late at night, but take time out during the day to be with the children. I think whenever you put an application in for flexible working, make sure that you discuss it with your line manager, so that the first time your line manager gets sight of the application, the formal document, it isn't cold. It comes after a period of discussion and you openly talk about what you would like and how you see it working. And for my final point around looking for flexibility and securing it is say, could we have a 12-week trial period? Now, it might be that you agree some markers for what success would look like, or you agree some markers for, well, if these things happen, then we know it definitely doesn't work. But a pilot is a great way to go if you've got a line manager who is perhaps reluctant. Okay, excuse me while I just blast on through this next slide, which was a poll, but given our really small numbers, I'm not going to put that up. Lastly, I just want to talk about getting organised and getting your ducks in a row. I think this is such a fun little picture. So many ducklings there. I'm not sure that any of you have got that many ducklings trailing behind you, although of course Helena Morrissey, big name in the city, does have 9 children. I'm not quite sure how many ducklings there are there. But my major point here, folks, is, and I make this in the book, there's a chapter on see your family as a team, is to remember that it's not all up to you. Now, whether you are single or whether you're in a partnership or married, you will have support around you. You will have some family members around you, I'm sure, people that you can call upon. It's not all up to you, okay? Especially if you are in a marriage or a partnership, then just because you're the last one coming back to work and your partner's perhaps already back at work or didn't take any leave, it doesn't mean that everything suddenly falls to you to organise. Instead, you want to have a conversation with your partner which goes something like this. Now that we are about to become a dual earning working family, how are we going to organise the domestic load? And you sit and you have a conversation together about what needs to be done, what tasks need to be done. In fact, I was having a conversation yesterday with Jolie Brearley. I don't know whether that name rings any bells for you. She is the founder of the Pregnant Then Screwed movement and also author of this brilliant new book, Pregnant Then Screwed, about the motherhood penalty. And we were recording an episode for our podcast, Comeback Coach. And Jolie was telling me about, I'm kicking myself now, I haven't got it, I'll have to ask Jolie, but telling me about an app that gamifies domestic chores. So you input the domestic chores in your house and how many points get allocated to these chores, and then between the two of you, or how many people in the household who are on this app and using it, you compete for points. And of course you only get the points by doing domestic things, and Jolie said that her husband likes to win, so invariably this means that he's doing more of the unpaid labour in their house, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So what else do we need to do to get organised for our return? Well, we need to timeline our return. So think backwards from your first day back at work to all the things that need to happen before then, from testing out childcare, getting bags packed, planning your route to work if it's changed, planning your commute, trying on your work clothes for when you are going to be going back into the office, etc., etc. And again, there's a whole chapter in the book, Mother's Work, on that. I think it's so important that you are in touch with work before you return. Some people think, right, great, I'm on maternity leave, I just want to put everything to one side, focus on my child, and not think about work at all. But do think that people who have contact with their teammates, with their line manager before they go back, do report having an easier return to work because they've had that contact. So it just takes some of that fear, that discomfort away from the first days and weeks back if you've had some contact in between. Now, I am ever the optimist, but we know that things will go wrong when you return to work. You're returning to work because you have been away having given birth or become a father, through adoption, or because you've had a baby yourself. And we need to prepare for things going wrong. Childhood illness peaks at 11 months, and that often coincides with when people are going back to work. And of course, children pick up things from when they're in a nursery setting or in a childminder setting. So it's vital that we prepare for those times when childcare either fails or when our children are sick. And just as an add-on to this, I think it's really important, if you do have a partner who you're sharing the load with, if you can either say to him or her, look, for my first 4 weeks back at work, it would be really helpful if you could be the first person that our nursery manager or childminder or nanny calls should there be a problem, because I really feel like I just need to get my feet under the table at work and be able to focus. And so that's a great thing that you can ask of your partner to do in those first 4 weeks back at work. And in fact, when I was writing the book, I came across a piece of research which looked at 50 dual earning couples, families who deem themselves to be professional, successful at work and successful at home. And this piece of research looked at these 50 people, these 50 couples, to establish what is it that they were doing that made a difference. And one of the things that I remember from the research that I cite in the book is that when they're at work, they absolutely focus on work. And when they're at home, they focus on home things. Now, obviously, that's got a different meaning now that a lot of us are working from home. But this idea of when you're in work mode, you're in work mode. And when you're in home mode, you're in home mode. So that's something else to consider as well. And finally, I just want to let you off the hook a little bit. Lower your expectations of yourself. It's going to take time to get back up to speed again. It's going to take time to make this adjustment. And it is really, really exhausting. I've had 2 children, so I know what it's like returning to work. It's exhausting returning to work. You're tired, you're assimilating lots of new information. And so in the evenings, the weekends, you just want to prioritize rest and recovery. So that means, if at all possible, let's not move house, let's not have any christenings or other religious ceremonies to mark the children if we can avoid it. Let's not throw big parties. Let's not put pressure on ourselves to have clean, tidy homes. Well, maybe we want clean homes, but not, scrupulously tidy homes. Just take all that pressure off so you can focus at work when you're there, and when you're at home, you can come home, rest, restore, and recover. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask for your questions, but before I do, I wanted to share a few resources with you that I think could be useful to you, friends that you've made in your NCT classes, that you might have been doing online, or any other communities that you're part of. These might be relevant for them as well. So I've got some free events that we're doing, that we're running every month this year. They form part of our Comeback Community employee experience, but we're making these events freely available for the rest of 2021. So we have one happening tonight on preparing for leave as a leader, and you can find all of these on the website comebackcommunity.co.uk/conversations, or you can go onto Eventbrite and search for Comeback Conversations. So tonight with Kat Jones, who's the CEO of the new travel company Byway, is my guest talking about preparing for leave as a leader. In June, this is one particularly relevant for fathers. So this is about how to use shared parental leave to be a great dad and get on at work. And my guest is Ian Dinwiddie, who is co-host of the Lockdown Dads podcast and the founder of Inspiring Dads. And he's also part of our coaching team who leads on our coaching with new fathers. So that's the June event. But before then, I put them out of order. Before then, next month, our event is about how to take care of your perinatal mental health. And that's with Mia Scotland. And that's actually going to be a fundraiser event for a charity called Pandas, which is focused on supporting families where prenatal or postnatal depression is a challenge. And we're going to be making a donation to Pandas for every participant that joins that live event on Tuesday, the 25th of May. Some podcasts, I've mentioned our podcast, Comeback Coach, a couple of episodes that really stand out for me that might be useful to you. Episode number 8 is with Valeria, a management consultant who's talking about what she did in her first few weeks back at work and who she reconnected with. So that might be useful to you. And episode 4 is about getting through the early weeks back at work. And that's with Rachel Jackson, who's just finished up at Cisco after taking a sabbatical, then deciding not to go back. So she's got a lot of experience of that. She had 2 children. And then 2 other podcasts. First Time Dads, that's a great one. That's produced by 2 journalists. And then the Leaders with Babies podcast, which does exactly what it says in the tin, which is supporting people with career ambitions who happen to have children. So thoroughly recommend those. And then finally, 4 books. I could have put on so many more, but I've limited it here. For those of you who are keen to go back and make a splash and continue to develop your career, I really recommend the book Playing Big by Tara Moore, and I've put a couple of recommendations there for books that are relevant to fathers, as well as flagging my own. If you want to carry on the conversation after today, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter using the handle @comebackcomuk. There are accounts talking specifically to you, to people coming back or preparing for leave. And there's also our main account, Talent Keepers UK, as well, that you can find us on Instagram and Twitter. And of course, there's the website, talentkeepers.co.uk. And I will send some links around via the bid event team today, the things that I've mentioned on visibility. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides there, folks, and really it's over to you. I'm wondering whether you have got some questions that you might want to ask for the benefit of other people actually here today, to see, so they can see what's on your mind. Because I think when we hear what's on other people's minds, it normalizes the worries that we ourselves are experiencing. So do post some questions in the chat to help other people out. And as I say, I really enjoy listening and learning to the things that are on your mind, and hopefully I can add some value by giving you some responses real time here today. But should you have questions that you'd rather not attach your name to, as I said, if you do use Instagram, then you can go over and send me a message on comebackcom UK. So that's an option as well. Or feel free to send me an email, jc@talentkeepers.co.uk. In fact, I'm just going to put that in the chat box there. If there are things on your mind you'd like to ask me, feel free to email. We've got a question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I don't know if it's Sean or Sewan. Forgive me. I wanted to ask about balancing with a job where you have to bring work home. I'm a teacher and will be returning full-time in September. I hear you. And actually, on that note, as a teacher, there is a great Twitter account and website that you might already be aware of, maternity teacher, paternity teacher. If you just give me a minute, let me just see whether I can find them on Twitter, because I do think the work that they're doing is really, really great. And you might already know about this already. Let me just find, hang on, maternity CPD. There's nothing like answering people's questions real time and getting the resources up. Okay, yes, so if you are on Twitter, have a look at maternity CPD. That's maternity lowercase, CPD in capitals. And they are a UK charity for parent teachers, and you'll find some interesting ideas on there. But from my perspective, I think that it's not so much about not bringing work home with you, but it's about having some clear rules or boundaries. I mean, that's a word we're hearing a lot more about since people have been working from home. And what I mean by boundaries is, if you know you've got work to bring home, then let's be sensible and let's say, okay, I'm going to bring work home on X many days of the week, or maybe it's every day of the week, but I'm going to reserve a certain amount of time on each day to focus exclusively on my marriage, on my partnership, on my child, so that you are not consumed by work. Because, you know, my parents were both teachers and I know what it's like. There's endless marketing, there's endless things that you can be doing to improve the experience of the kids that you're teaching. There's endless bits of admin and things that you need to be doing. So instead of just working and never having any end, carve out pockets of time where you say, tonight I am going to make dinner. I'm going to enjoy standing at the chopping board and having that bit of me time to listen to a podcast, or, you know, play with my toddler, or talk to my toddler whilst I'm cooking. And I'm not going to do that whilst looking at emails or considering this other thing. So that's my best advice there, is draw some mini boundaries. It's not about not bringing work home, but it is about reserving some time for other things. And if you want to follow up on that, please feel free to drop me a line. As I say, really happy to carry on the conversation. I wonder if there are any other further questions from other people who are preparing to go back to work, or in fact, whether you're back already. You know, maybe tell me in the chat box, are you back already? And what's helping you? Because then we can all learn on the chat. If you are back, tell us in the chat, and have you got any tips for the first few weeks or months back? Okay, Kirsten, thanks. You're back at work and you've been back for nearly 2 months. Have you got a tip, Kirsten? What has helped you to settle back in? Is there anything that you can share with everybody else here? What's helped? What's hindered you? Have you returned remotely? What's working for you? I just think we've got an opportunity here to share some ideas as a group and learn from one another. But equally, as I can't see you, I don't know, but maybe you're bouncing babies or consoling newborns that need milk or whatever. So perhaps you're not able to get to the keyboard. Right, okay. So Kirsten's saying, you know, you were always a remote worker before COVID. Yeah. So you know how to operate in this remote environment. And Natalie's been back about 4 months. Natalie, what have you learned in this time? What has helped you? I'm curious to know. Tell us, because then we can all benefit from your learning. Yeah, Kirsten, you're saying, so you've always been able to put the boundaries in place, but they're absolutely vital to your day. I wonder what your boundaries are, Kirsten. And whilst you perhaps come back and tell us what your boundaries are, I'm just going to find the article that I mentioned for you about 14 ways to boost your visibility when you return remotely, if any of you are returning remotely. So I'm just going to pop that in the box now. And so Natalie says, for the benefit of the recording, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see the chat box and the recording. Natalie says, I found a phased return helped me, so I started with 3 days. Yes, fantastic. And anyone thinking phased return, it's not a policy that we have in place at my place, don't worry, you can use accrued holiday to make a phased return work. And I think that's a really brilliant idea. So if you haven't been using kit days, for example, to start the transition back in, then a phased return using accrued holiday can be really useful. Kirsten says, we split jobs between myself and my husband, sort of like a production line. Excellent. The team works. That's fantastic. Yeah, like a well-oiled machine. And Natalie says, yeah, I used holidays to cover the other 2 days. Yeah. And I imagine that that has given you a much smoother return to work, Natalie, than if you had tried to return full-time straight away, which can just be a huge, huge shock to the system. And as I said, do go and have a look at our Instagram and Twitter account, because we're putting what we hope is useful stuff up there all the time. And in fact, next week is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, and we've got a special episode of the podcast coming out on Monday, and that again is a fundraiser for the charity I mentioned at the beginning, Pandas Foundation. So do go and have a look wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, Google. Subscribe to Come Back Coach, because there's lots of good stuff there already. But as I say, fundraiser episode comes out on Monday, and we'd love you to download that. Every download that we get will be giving some money to Pandas. And Kirsten's saying here, I'm still using holidays for 1 day off a week. I'll then be doing full-time hours in 4 days. Yeah, well, the great thing about that, Kirsten, is that you're retaining your salary, because I imagine if you did go down to 4 days a week, that you would still be doing a full-time job anyway. And a bit of advice for anyone who is going to move to 4 days or less a week, then make sure you do have that conversation with your line manager about, well, what 20% or what 40%, if it's you working a 3-day week, what 20 or 40% of your role will you not be doing anymore? Because clearly if you're being paid for less, you can't be expected to still be doing that full-time role. Claire, thank you for contributing something in the chat box here. I've been back 4 months. Returning remotely has helped me. Myself and my husband have split childcare. He's doing breakfast and getting them dressed. I finish earlier and do dinner. I was terrified coming back to work, but I absolutely love it. I feel like me again, and actually feel when I'm not working, I'm a better mum as I have more patience. Oh, that's so beautiful, Claire. Thank you for sharing that. I certainly personally resonate with that, and I know lots of the people we coach and meet in the workshops we run can identify with that. It is terrifying, isn't it, when everyone else has been there? It's a bit like being really late to the party, or this fabulous party's been going on, and you turn up at the last minute and you've got to get into the swing of things. But then once you are in the swing of things, it's great. So it's really lovely to see you use those words. I absolutely love it. I'd be curious, Claire, to know what you do. What is it that you do for a living? Just wonderful to have job love. So anybody else got a question that you might want to ask? What's on your mind? I always think a good question is anything that you've been turning over in your head for hours, days, maybe even weeks, the sort of thing that you maybe are concerned about first thing when you wake in the morning, or the thing that you might be thinking about when you're up in the night with your baby. Those are really great questions to ask. I'd be really happy to answer them. I don't know whether Claire's going to tell us what she does for a living. Maybe not. A civil servant, okay. Working for the MRHA as an inspector. Well, it's really, really great to hear that you love your job, Claire. Thanks for sharing that. Great question here. Did anyone not want to return to work and had to? How did you deal with those thoughts practically? It'd be great to get some thoughts on that. I'll add something while we wait for other people to put things in the chat box. So one of the things that I hear people talk about who are in that position where actually they decided they'd much rather stay at home is they just try and tune into the benefits and try and downplay the negative stuff, the upset voice in their minds about returning to work. So the things I hear people say, things like, well, me going back, I'm going to be a role model for my child or my children. So that's one good thing that is going to come out of this. And that's a big one, isn't it? Just thinking about how the children benefit. I suppose there might be something on the financial side that you might be able to give your children some experiences with a bit of extra money. Not that a lot of money is left over, let's face it, after childcare is paid for. But I think just trying to tune into some of the benefits and downplay the negatives. And Kirsten's saying here, I decided to return early. I had a lot of guilt around that once I started back at work. Yeah, and that's something that we hear a lot about, is thinking, have I done the right thing? Have I done the wrong thing? But there can be lots of reasons why people return early. I was chatting with somebody last week for season 2 of the podcast, and she returned after 5 months and had a child with a really significant physical disability, and her husband took shared parental leave. But sometimes needs must, and it might be that, by going back earlier, you are able to get into the swing of your job. Perhaps if there is a seasonal nature to your job, and certain times of the year are going to be busier or quieter, more complex, more simple, more stressful, less stressful, it might be that you want to go back sooner in order to return in a quiet period, and so that's going to help your family overall if you start to settle back in when you are able to do it in a less stressful time. It might be that you need to go back because you need the money. There is a mortgage to pay. There might be other financial commitments that you need to meet. So think, and again, there's a chapter, the book is called How to Get a Grip on Guilt and Make a Smooth Return to Work. That's the subtitle. So there's a whole chapter there, Kirsten, and anyone else that's thinking about guilt that you might want to have a look at. The book, you can get it on Kindle and you can get it in paperback. But if we can tune into the reasons why we're going back early, I remember early in our culture is not early in some other cultures. So the US, for example, they go back, well, they don't get any pay. So they go back very soon after giving birth. In France, I think it's 12 weeks they have paid. So it's not early in some cultures. But just tune into the positives. I wonder if there are any more questions or comments that you want to make to share with everyone else that's here today, and for the benefit of the recording, those people who might be watching this back later. Lucy, thanks for sharing something here. I wanted to return. Oh, great, we're getting some more chat in now. I wanted to return the first time and loved it. The second time, there was a team restructure, and I shared my management role with someone who didn't have children and devoted early mornings and worked all evening on our work, which is an enormous challenge, as I couldn't keep up. Oh, I hear you. I also struggled as my baby wouldn't sleep, awake 4 to 5 times a night. I wish we'd spent more time together with our manager making a plan around this. Lucy, thank you so much for sharing that, because you remind me of a coachee that I was working with who came back to work at the end of last year, and she was talking about working in a team in just that kind of setup where she'd got a colleague who was able to devote so much more time to everything because didn't have children. And it is a challenge. So I do think communication with your line manager about what you can deliver and when you can deliver. And I know it's easy for me to say this, but I think it's so much of it is about tuning into running your own race. And if we get into, comparing ourselves with other people, it takes our focus away from being brilliant in our role, takes our headspace away from it. But we'll realise, well, I can't keep up, I can't deliver in the same way that this other person is delivering. So we've really got to think about, what am I here to deliver and how am I going to do it? But I was listening to the Fern Cotton podcast, Happy Place, which I think is such a lovely podcast. And she was chatting to Jake Humphrey, and they were talking about compare and despair, that we compare ourselves to others, we end up in despair. So someone else says, I didn't want to return when I did, but we needed to financially. My baby was 12 months old, but had spent most of her life in lockdown with just me and had separation anxiety, and I don't think she was ready. It's been a difficult few months. The childcare had to shut anyway due to COVID outbreaks, but now she loves it, and it's amazing to see how her confidence has grown. Thank you very much for sharing that, because I think that shows us just how resilient children are and how they will adjust. And I know when I ran this session last week for another organisation, one of the comments that we discussed was around how it can be helpful for if you're in a partnership and there's a daddy around, then for father to drop off at childminder or nursery, because there tends to be less of an issue. I don't know whether you think that's terribly sexist, but this seems to be a consensus that I hear from other people as well, is that for a father to drop off, fathers tend to be much more matter of fact about it. Go to childcare, have a lovely time, see you later. Whereas I think when us mothers drop off, we're so highly attuned and worrying about how our children might be feeling. And, you know, if we've been breastfeeding, there's that closeness and the smell of the milk, that it can be more difficult to detach from our children when they're going into childcare. So we might be better if we can to do the pickup at the end of the day rather than do the drop off, if that's possible. But look, children are resilient, and they do get their head around that childcare setting eventually. And remember, if the problems persist and the childcare isn't working for you or your child, you feel uncomfortable, you can change it. You know, it might not be straightforward, but don't think that anything that you've set up is set in stone, because it's not. You can make a change. So into the last 10 minutes of our time together today, I wonder if there are any other final questions or thoughts that you might share to help other people who are preparing for coming back to work after parental leave. If you want to put them in the chat box now, that would be great, and I'll read them out for the benefit of those people who might be watching the recording after we've been live together chatting today. Does anyone have any quick wins for kit days? Say more. What do you want to know about kit days? Is it what to do on them? How to arrange the childcare for them? Say a bit more about what you want to know about kit days. And actually, I can direct you to another article on our main website around kit days. And this is a piece that you might want to send to your head teacher or to your line manager if you're not in school. I've just put it in the chat box now about powerful kit days. So we've got another comment here. I went back early for my son so he could go to the nursery and play with other children. He was born May 2020, so lockdown baby. Also, my husband does the drop off as I start earlier and then I do the pickup. Yeah, and I wonder how that's working for you. But I tend to hear people who say, Dad does drop off, Mum does pick up. I tend to find that works really well. Not always possible, but I always think it's nice to be the parent who goes and does the pickup and the drop off. And if you want to come back on this kit days, any quick wins for kit days? I'll answer this as though you're asking, what should you do? Okay, what to do on them. I'm going for my first tomorrow for staff training after work. I'm nervous about it. Have not heard from my team, only from line manager once or twice. Okay, so top tip is if you've got a friend at work who you feel comfortable giving a ring or dropping a text to today and say, I'm coming in for a kit day, will you be there to meet me, so that you're not walking in alone? I recommend that you do that, or can you meet that person for a cup of tea or something before you go and do that, just so you're going in, you're picking up a bit of the vibe before you go in. Also, that bit that I mentioned at the beginning about go into listening mode, say I'm just going to be like a sponge, I'm soaking it all up, so if I'm not saying much it's because I'm absorbing, assimilating, so then you're not having to worry about people thinking, why am I not asking a question, why am I not saying anything? I always think that kit days, if there's anything that you can do to get yourself ready for going back. So is there any housekeeping you need to do? Like, do you need to re-establish technology, email connections? Do you need to renew your security pass? Do you need to find where your desk is, or your locker, or your pigeonhole if things have moved? Doing anything that's going to help set you up so when you do return back on first day, you've got all that stuff out of the way. You might want to just have some one-to-ones with your team if you've got some direct reports. You might want to just sit in on some meetings. You've mentioned that you're doing some training, so that's great, going back to be learning something new that's going to set you up for success. You know, and I think a large part of kit days is simply being on work soil. It is that action of going and being in work, the place, if that's what you were doing. or if you're doing things remotely, some remote training, then I think the same thing stands, as I said about going and having a cup of tea, but do it virtually with somebody. You know, go and do that so that you're not feeling that you're coming in cold. And the same thing stands, you know, this idea of just getting onto not so much work soil if you're not going to be physically at work, but getting into that mentality of work. You know, you're stepping out of parental mode and you're getting back into work thinking mode. Kirsten, I love your comment here. Amazingly, I have no trouble popping my son to nursery. He loves it. And that is fantastic. And why would they not? You know, all of those toys that they haven't perhaps got at home, and the lovely sounds, and the people with smiley faces looking forward to seeing them. And yeah, that's wonderful, Kirsten. I think you're imparting a lot of confidence in other people here, and maybe watching the recording, that children mostly really enjoy their childcare setting. Right, Lucy says, I would recommend talking to someone in your workplace who's recently returned from mat leave, if possible, before returning, and ask your line manager if you can spend some time on one of your kit days. Ask if they have any specific advice, but absolutely don't compare yourself to them. Just try to listen to useful hints. Lucy, that's great. Yeah, totally agree with that. Totally agree. The best piece of advice I was given when I was pregnant with our first child was listen to all the advice people give you, then filter it and make up your own mind. And I thought that was great. Good. Okay. And I love that we're still here. We might be a small group today, but we're still here, and you're still putting comments in the box and questions. So anything else that you might want to add or ask? I've sent you the link to the kit days. I've mentioned that if you subscribe to Care Mail, our fortnightly mailing from comebackcommunity.co.uk, you'll get access to our line manager PDF that you can forward onto your line manager to help her or him to support you in your first days and weeks back at work. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that I might share with you. You know what, I'm just going to put the link in for the podcast actually. I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe, listen to that, and especially if you download the episode that's coming next week. That's the fundraiser for Pandas Foundation, the maternal mental health charity that I mentioned earlier. Anything else that you might want that might be useful? I've mentioned a couple of books. I'll just see whether there's any more questions coming in at the end here. I'm just going to put the link up now actually to this is a link to our fundraiser event on May the 25th. Again, a fundraiser for Pandas Foundation, and that's about maternal, can't spell, writing strange things, maternal mental health, the event. And that event actually is with Mia Scotland, and Mia is a perinatal, I'm talking while I'm typing, perinatal clinical psychologist and author. Gosh, terrible spelling on here. So that might be something to recommend to your friends. It might be something you want to come along to. Again, it's absolutely free. I've got a message here saying I cannot see your screen. Is it just me? I'm putting it in the chat box. So I've put those links into the chat box. I haven't got any slides up on the screen at the moment. It's just the chat box. And I will send the slides around after today. I'll get those to you via the events team. And yeah, final thoughts are just to be in touch with me if you would like. My email address is jc@talentkeepers.co.uk, or find us on Instagram or Twitter using the handle @comebackcomuk. That's com with 2 M's. And I hope that today has been useful, and I wish you well with your onward journey through working parenthood. Many ups, many downs, and yeah, I wish you all well, and thank you very much for being here today. Take care, everyone. Stay bright, and remember that you are just as good as you ever were, and your break from work makes you even better because you come back with a fresh perspective the whole team can benefit from. Cheerio, folks. Bye-bye.